I'm excited to bring you today an interview with Tomas Rodriguez. And he is a meditation teacher based in Miami, and we talk about his personal journey over many, many years, how he went from really struggling with his practice to now that it is like a natural, effortless part of his life. And I think as I could really relate to what he said and really see my own journey reflected in his, that you will also be able to learn a lot from this. If you feel like you're struggling with meditation or it doesn't feel like it really clicked for you yet, you may get an insight into how this overall journey of meditation is really something that unfolds over time, and periods of struggle are really nothing to really worry about. They are quite normal indeed. And so from that we move on into like the deeper realizations we both had. And one of these realizations is the absolute certainty that reality is one. And how we both at first, when we saw this, really struggled with it. How a strong sense of fear came up and the ego reacted strongly in both of us against this experience, even though we had many years of meditative practice and were still like overwhelmed by the depths and the profundity of such an insight. But we will give you pointers to see how we dealt with that insight, and maybe it helps you as well. So I'm really excited for this interview, and just sit back, relax, maybe get a cup of coffee or tea and listen to this interview with Tomas Rodriguez.
We have been speaking a while back, and I feel we really connected and had some great conversation there. And so I wanted to use this opportunity just to dive a little bit deeper into those questions that I had since our conversation. Like, I know you have been meditating, and wanted to ask you some things. And maybe to start, let the viewers know who you are, what you're doing, and like what has your past been so far with meditation and spirituality.
Well, that's a lot.
Yeah.
Well, let's start by saying I'm very happy to be here. You're a great guy. I love that conversation, and I love that you're very authentic in your search, and that's why I wanted to have that exchange with you, because I really value that, like authenticity and true longing for, call it God or the mystery of life, the existential quest to live life more fully, maybe. I don't know. One about it a bit different, right?
Yeah, the deepest motivation.
Yeah, like what? Yeah, like what motivates our life? What gives meaning?
Yeah.
And for me, definitely, God has been. I mean, like words are symbols, right? So this word God is a symbol that we put so much stuff in it. And, but since I was like a very little kid, I've always had this relationship with what I feel is this power behind everything, And I would have my conversations with God always like at sunset, like where I would sit down and, I don't know, tell God what was happening in my life. And I would feel like answers would kind of spring up from within me, like feelings, like.
So your first connection to this was like through Christianity, is that right?
Yes, true. I mean, I was Catholic, raised Catholic. And yeah, Jesus, I would say, was kind of my first guru, in a way, teacher. And I remember when I was a little kid, I would watch the movies about the crucifixion of Jesus. And I would burst out crying, like, for his pain. And like, I would feel his passion. And yeah, it really spoke to me. And I was kind of also like an introvert. I mean, I've always been like introvert, extrovert, but more introvert than extrovert.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would spend a lot of time on my own when I was a little kid. And that kind of created this. I would spend a lot of time, like I had a big house. My mother had a big house in the countryside with a lot of land where I could just be by myself. And I
Mm-hmm.
would spend a lot of time in nature. And I think, in a way, speaking with God, having a conversation with life. I don't know what.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember one of my first contemplations about consciousness, I think. I remember walking and thinking, what happens with everything behind me when I'm not looking at it? Does it disappear, or is it there?
Yeah.
Like, and I remember having that thought as a little kid. Like
Oh,
maybe it
wow.
only exists when I turn around. Maybe it's not there all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And interesting enough, that's reality. In a way, it only manifests the moment you perceive it. It only solidifies into something. So, and then there was like when I was 15 years old, I entered into kind of this deep depression because I actually started reading many German thinkers. One was this book, Damien Herman Hesse, right
Mm-hmm.
there, Herman Hesse,
Yeah.
and then another book by Eric Fromm. What's the name is To Have or To Be.
Oh, yeah. That's such a great book. Yeah.
Yeah, and
It,
I read those books, and I started like questioning everything. And I
mm-hmm.
really also felt like very disappointed with my friends at school. Like I felt everyone was very vapid. Everything was based on a lot of interest. Um, in a way, I had a few good friends, but they left to other schools. So there was a moment where I really felt like I couldn't find people that I could have conversations with that I felt wasn't superficial.
Yeah.
And also, at that time, I was also coming into terms with my sexuality, and I'm gay. So I went through this deep crisis of hating myself because I was gay, and thinking, coming from a Catholic raising, I thought it was wrong,
Yeah.
and so what happened was that I kind of went into a depression because I really didn't feel what was the purpose of all of it? Like, why am I going to grow up? Why am I going to marry? Why am I going to go to a career if I'm going to die at the end? We're all going to die. Why are we doing this whole thing of life? Like if we're all going to live forever and we're all going to die. But everybody lives life like they're going to live forever in
Mm-hmm.
a way,
Yeah.
like oblivious to the fact that we're going to die, you know? And that really hit at me at that age. And so I started reading a lot of books until I found this book written by a guru, by an Indian guru. And he was speaking about Tantric philosophy of yoga
Mm-hmm.
and how in yoga there's this understanding that everything is God. This whole universe is a manifestation of God. We are all God. And that spirituality basically is having the experience of that,
Mm-hmm.
recognizing,
Yeah.
and not only having the experience, but the goal of yoga was to live life from that point of view, like really experiencing life in a very non intellectual way, but experiential way, that you are actually everything, and that
Mm-hmm.
everything is you, and that we are all one.
Mm-hmm. So would you say this insight is clashed into your former beliefs? If you say you were first
No,
coming from
no,
Christianity?
on the contrary. because when I was like,
Okay.
yeah, 13, 14, I started questioning Christian beliefs. Like,
Mm-hmm.
would say, if there's a demon God, you put it there. So I'm not going to have this dichotomy between God and demon. And if there's a demon, he's working for you. And I started like always having this unifying understanding within me where I didn't like the dichotomy of good and bad, evil. And
Mm-hmm.
it felt to me that it was not real, that it was
Mm-hmm.
how God was. And also,
Mm-hmm.
when I read Damien, this book by Herman Hesse, it kind of ratified within me that, sorry, I'm speaking Spanish, it confirmed, uh, this feeling that God is the integration of everything, it's the one.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, no, I already had been put into question a lot of my Christian beliefs. And so I was open for these teachings. And when I read them, I was like, yes, this is the truth. This is what I believe in. I
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, and reading this book also was very magical because it was not only reading and thinking intellectually about the ideas. I started feeling energy coming in the book towards me. I started feeling this field of energy of love surrounding me when I was reading the book,
Mm-hmm.
and I felt like I was in the presence of the teacher who I was reading. I felt in his company. And I felt
Mm-hmm.
like I was fully embraced by his energy. And then I started following his guidance, started meditating,
Mm-hmm.
and I started having spiritual experiences. Like, I remember my first one was I was sitting and I was kind of repeating the mantra that he gave. And I saw all these millions little blue lights coming towards my body.
Okay. Wow.
And when they
How
hit,
would you interpret that experience? How would you interpret?
I haven't finished.
Okay. Sorry.
So these lights came like millions of little blue lights would hit my body. And the moment they hit my body, a little particle of my body would disappear.
Oh.
So
Mm-hmm.
then suddenly, like my body started vanishing little by little until it was completely dissolved. There was no body, but I was there.
Mm-hmm.
But I wasn't my body. I was just this something.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I got scared. And then I came back awareness into the body and I woke up. I
Mm-hmm.
woke out of the experience. But of course, that was my first experience like, whoa, I'm not the body, I'm something else. I'm this thing.
Mm. Would you say there was a connection to something that you did prior to the experience that like facilitated such a insight that you are not the body, like not like intellectual, but like on an experiential level? Was there something you did in order that for this to happen, or how did this experience unfold?
This happened like 30 years ago. So I don't
Mm-hmm.
really remember. I'm sure that maybe in the book that I was reading, maybe there was something about that to the point of that,
Mm-hmm.
but I remember being very startled. I wasn't expecting this experience. I wasn't, uh, you know, it just happened. And so I
Yeah.
don't think it even, I don't think it was, I mean, for sure it was related to everything because yoga is all about the self and transcending your identification with body. But I don't think maybe I was necessarily reading about that. It's just that that's what came up. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Before that, I had never meditated. I was
Mm-hmm.
surprised, and for me that was a gift of grace of this teacher that I had been connected energetically through the. I feel like I received the energy initiation
Mm-hmm.
because later on it wasn't easy for me to meditate my first years of practice. I would say my first 10 years of practice, it wasn't easy for me to meditate.
Yeah.
This was definitely a gift from grace. I wasn't that skillful.
Mm.
It was something that
Yeah.
happened.
It's so interesting that you say that. I mean, first of all, I was really fascinated by your story because it's so different from mine. And it just reminded me that no matter what we do or believe, truth always shines through that. And you can believe in whatever you want beforehand. It doesn't do anything to truth. It doesn't obstruct it in any way. So whether you believe in Christianity or like I did in pure materialism, physicalism, um, it just if you question, if you follow your intuition and really stay with the questioning, then you always end up at truth. If you develop this capability of really looking for what your experience is truly like, I find it no beliefs can like really keep you from seeing the truth. So that was really fascinating for me. And also my your experience that like for the first 10 years you had like difficulties in meditation, it kind of resembles my own experience. Like the first few years definitely were, compared to what I experience now in meditation, they were a struggle. So, yeah, maybe tell us a little bit more about how your meditation practice evolved over time.
Well, I wanted to comment to have an observation about what you spoke about truth, because
Yeah.
there's this, I don't know where I read it, but somewhere where imagine you meditate and suddenly this white light appears in meditation, right? And
Mm-hmm.
maybe if you're a Christian, you're going to say, "Oh my God, it's the light of Jesus." And if you're a Buddhist, you're going to say, "Oh, this is the golden truth of Buddha." And
Mm-hmm.
so, interesting enough, it's amazing how, yes, I think spiritual experiences are their own thing, and yet how easily is for us to misinterpret that, you know,
Yeah.
your own set of beliefs, like the meaning that we give, even our perception or our experiences of them sometimes uh, can happen through the filter of the mind and our belief system. So
Mm-hmm.
it is a process, I think, throughout the years of questioning even your own spiritual experience
Mm-hmm.
brings you
Yeah.
closer and closer to what you can call truth, which at
Mm.
the end, in my case, the only thing I can call truth is what I am.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that cannot be described in words, you know.
Yeah, it's that's the case. At first, you bring all these beliefs with you into meditation. You approach it like you have these ideas about what it's going to be, and then the more concentration you build and ability to stay with what is, you can see those beliefs kind of dissolve in front of your eyes, and you cannot really hold on to anything apart from the truth of I am, like your
What
true
you are,
being. And yeah, that's
what
so
we are.
beautiful. Yeah,
And it's beautiful
yeah,
because, again, you read this ancient yogic text, and they're all saying that. They're all saying,
yeah,
don't hold on to the form. It's not there. Go to the essence. Go to your own essence.
yeah.
And, but that's the hardest thing in life, right? Because we're born into a world of forms, and we
Hmm.
identify with the form, we identify with the place, we identify with mom and dad. And it gives meaning to our life, it gives beauty, we fall in love with it. And then at the end, we find security in it. And then the crazy or tragic thing about life is that everything that you find security in gets destroyed.
Yeah.
And even your own self.
Yeah, nothing survives in this realm of form.
Exactly. Nothing survives. So And it's amazing how so many people live avoiding that understanding.
Hmm.
You know? Like,
Yeah. Maybe go into like what were your struggles over the years with meditation, because I think many people listening to this would probably get some great insight from just what your struggles were and feel they are resembled in themselves, and then maybe also if at all if you were able to do something to overcome them, or how you would say like now it's no longer a struggle for you to meditate, like what was going on there.
wow, that's another big question.
Yeah, you are free to talk as long as you want.
I would say, let me speak maybe about stages. I think the first stage, I would call it the psychological, dealing with the psychological, emotional self.
Hmm.
You know, and so I was a 16-year-old when I started meditating. So imagine me at that age with, even though I was questioning my Catholic beliefs, it took many years for me to break free from my fear of coming out of it and embracing a whole new uh, worldview, right?
Hmm.
So first it was that kind of struggle and fear, a lot of meditations like, what is this? What am I doing? Breaking free from my. So I would do it, but there would be a struggle. There would be a belief resistance. And so there was that one layer of it, fear. Uh, what's going to happen when I meditate? You know,
Hmm.
uh, I mean, I also came into meditation by what is known as Tantric path of meditation, where you actually in this path you receive an initiation of a guru, and they wake up what is called your Kundalini energy. I don't know if you ever heard about it.
Yeah.
So it's
Hmm.
basically, to summarize this Kundalini energy, it's just imagine that there's a part of your body that is dormant. And when that part of your body is awakened, that part of your body kind of guides you in your own spiritual journey. So
Hmm.
when I received that initiation and I would meditate, I would uh, often have sometimes strong experiences when this energy would grab me, and other times maybe months of suffering bad meditations. But when the
Yeah.
energy would grab me and come strong, then crazy things would happen. Like I would be meditating, and suddenly I would hear this crazy laughter in my room, you know,
Hmm.
like demoniac laughter. And I would be like, or I
Okay.
would hear this woman shouting like she was being killed, or crazy things. And of
Oh
course,
wow.
that scared me. But in my path, we were taught that a lot of things were going to come up, that you should just let it come up and let it go, and just go back to your focus, your mantra. And so I did that. And but of course, it was kind of confronting all this fear about what am I getting into, this inner world and
Mm.
experiences. And so there was fear and kind of, but also having trust of something deeper that I've been connecting because of my initiation, which I haven't
Hmm.
described it to yet, but it's a whole experience. I got to feel my unity with God in my initiation process.
Hmm.
So I knew that beneath all this fear and crazy experiences, there was this place within me where I was free and I was peace and I was complete. So I knew that
Hmm.
was there and I wanted to go back into that. So I was willing to go through it, you know, and that's, I
Hmm.
think, was a great support. I knew without any doubt that within me was this totality and completeness, and that I just needed to traverse the world of the mind and to get into it. So that helped me to kind of stay constant. But I would say, so sometimes grace would grab me and I would have these amazing experiences. But other times, most of the time, I was just sitting and I would sit with my emotions, my agitation, whatever I was going on in school at that time, or in my school of architecture when I was in the university. Sometimes I would get totally lost in my architectural projects and I wouldn't meditate. So, what happened is at this period, I was confronting my desires for success in the world. I wanted to be successful in architecture. I was falling in love with a certain guy, so I would think about him all the time. Or so I was confronting this mind that is constantly moved by desire and fear, you know? And
Mm-hmm.
instead of recognizing that, I spent a lot of times kind of psychoanalyzing myself in meditation. Like, what am I thinking this? And what's the origin of that? Kind of trying to fix my psychological self to become better in my ego,
Yeah.
because that's where the majority of us live, trying to improve ourselves so that we can be loved by others, so that we can feel good. So a lot of my first years was kind of in this psychoanalytical meditation. I would sit to meditate, but most of the time I was just trying to improve myself and thinking about myself. There were moments where I would let go of my mind, but most of the time I was in the realm of psychoanalyzing myself. There were moments where I dropped meditation for months, and then I would go back into it. Um, there was a lot of emotional upheaval. But I kept, at least I kept going to my meditation group once a week and being
Mm-hmm.
immersed in a group of people that meditated, and the energy in those moments, I would go deep. So I kept at it, even though I was really bad at it. I kept going. And then finally, there was a moment where I left my career and I went to India and I committed like for first 2 years in New York and then 2 years in India, I committed to an ashram. People where people go to do meditation and selfless service.
Mm-hmm.
So in that heightened atmosphere is when I finally started to becoming regular in my meditation practice,
Mm-hmm.
and I started being able to connect with peace on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm.
I started to recognize more of my ego mind and mental stuff and be able to drop it. Part of the process of getting there was I understood that desire was getting me muddled in my mind. Desire and fear. In yoga scriptures, they say the mind is moved by these two forces: attraction and
Mm-hmm.
aversion. Attraction and aversion. So wherever your mind goes, it's because it's seeking something or is running away from something. So what I would do is like, okay, so if that's what's going on, I'm going to burn everything. So when I would sit to meditate, whatever worried me or whatever I was attached to, I would imagine that I would burn it in fires. Like I would burn everything in fire. I would burn myself in fire. I would burn everything and imagine that I'm leaving everything behind. And that
Mm-hmm.
kind of, even though it sounds very radical, it's just your imagination. And what that allowed me was to finally like let go, let go of my attachments. And then I
Mm-hmm.
started connecting with some level of peace.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and the more you go into that peace, it's kind of like it's like a neural pathway where the mind learns to travel to that place almost like automatically, it starts knowing the path.
Mm.
And then after the ashrams, I came back to my country. I started teaching meditation. I took, and the moment I started teaching meditation, I started kind of gathering everything that I had learned throughout my years of study with my teachers and kind of asking myself, well, what is my truth that I can teach? What is mine? What is real? And then I
Mm-hmm.
kind of started kind of embracing my understandings, like the jewels that I had gathered throughout my years of practice. And the moment I
Mm.
start teaching it, I start kind of committing more strongly to them.
Mm.
And one of what has become my main teaching is you don't have to change anything about you. You don't have to look for anything. You just have to lovingly experience what you are at this moment, at this precise
Mm-hmm.
moment. And by
Mm.
feeling and experiencing your body, your thoughts, your emotions, without trying to do anything about it, just experience them, meditation happens. So there's this beautiful teaching in Tantra where one of the ways to define the spiritual path is yoga is intimacy with the present moment. So being intimate with whatever is real right here, right now.
Mm-hmm.
And the moment you do that, you are in meditation. The moment you are resisting to life, either by being lost in in the future because of a desire or being lost in the past because of something that happened.
Mm.
You're the moment you're lost in rejecting the present moment, the moment you're lost in the mind and you enter into a subtle state of suffering.
Mm.
The more you can just relax and be in the moment, and you can think and you can feel and you can be, but anchored more in the moment, the more you are grounded in a state of well being and wonder with
Mm-hmm.
life. But the more we move
Yeah.
away from that place of surrendering to the present moment, we enter in this kind of psychotic or disconnection from ourselves and life. And we start entering into this state of ease. So yeah,
Mm.
that's how. So when nowadays when I meditate, I just sit and I experience whatever I'm feeling. I'm very kinesthetic in my meditation. So I
Mm-hmm.
into the body, into whatever I'm feeling.
Mm.
That connects me with my emotional self, and that connects me with my mental self. And I feel it all, and I feel the surroundings, and I embrace it all as a unity. And when I do that, there's just bliss in the experience of
Yeah.
existence.
That sounds so good. Yeah. Would you say the point, or is there a certain point in your journey where you could say, okay, there I recognize that I switched from doing meditation to being meditation? Because I understand it that as long as you feel you are doing meditation, it is kind of like a struggle. And for me, in my experience, it was like at some point it felt like the meditation, I didn't have to do anything anymore.
Yeah,
It's just directly I go to being,
yeah,
which cannot be described, but you say it's blissful and that resembles my own experience. But would you say that matches your experience?
totally, totally. Like I tell my students when I'm teaching the meditation course, it's like my first module, almost all the lessons, there's something to do, but at the end I give them the understanding. And yet in that doing, understand that you're doing something just to give the mind something to do until she can let go and just be. And
Yeah.
so the whole process, I mean, it's also interesting because it's not about not doing techniques, like it's about how you do that techniques. Because honestly,
Yeah.
the technique, almost all meditation techniques are about being with something. Like even if you're repeating the mantra, you're being with the mantra as it
Yeah.
repeats within you. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so it's, yeah, that process of moving from doing to being, I think it's a gradual learning on the process of meditation. At the beginning, people need something to do. Uh, we need to have some level of control. We
Mm-hmm.
want some control.
Yeah.
You cannot teach people to let go of control because they are not even aware of how they're controlling. So you got to give
Yeah.
them something to control. But what you do is you go reducing that until people are left with nothing. But
Mm-hmm.
that is kind of like that's almost like an evolution of consciousness in each person, where it's kind of a
Mm-hmm.
gradual process of moving from doing to being. And also
Mm-hmm.
that happens in life too, right? Where
Mm-hmm.
where I live a lot life from a feeling place and effortless, and then things happen out there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if I think I have to do something out there, then and then it's not connected with a natural and spontaneous inner state, then often it's just more noise in my existence.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so true. Yeah. Would you then, in this context, say that what you did towards the beginning of your journey, the Kundalini energy and this release of powerful experiences, would you say that was necessary to your path, or did it even maybe distract a little bit? Would you advise people to, as you said, look for reducing the doing, or should they, for maybe only a period of time, like engage in these release practices where like the energy is really high and the experience can be intense? What are your thoughts around that?
You know, actually, Tantra philosophy already speaks about that.
Mm,
They're called the upayas, or the means of attainment of the goal. They're different means. So the first upaya is the upaya, or the first means is the means of doing. So, for example, you do your yoga practice, you do your meditation with japa, you do you do something that is going to give the mind a focus, so that the mind can slowly let go of outward cares, and it goes into kind of more an inward focus.
mm-hmm,
Chanting mantras, all those different things are powerful. They're all powerful. They're not less than non-doing. They're just they're effective into releasing the mind. The problem is,
mm-hmm,
in time, you need to understand that once you know what's going on, you can let go of the doing. But normally, the majority of people starting in this path, is good to give them something to do on a regular basis.
mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because if not, people fool themselves that they're understanding the high teachings, the non doing teachings, but often they're not. And so they're just in a form of self evasion or not taking responsibility. So that's why often the doing practice are important, because as you
Mm-hmm,
go through them, is the only way often to understand what non-doing is about. Once you start getting the experience, the inner states that start arising from the doing, you know.
mm-hmm,
But then, of course, there comes a second stage where you realize um, the it's almost like going from the form to the non-form. So the second means are more not so much physical practice or more contemplations. So is, like when you study Vedanta in yoga philosophy or also Tantra, there are meditations that are more contemplative, like, for example, who are you? Ask yourself that question in meditation. What is that remains when everything within you changes? Like the body changes, the emotion changes, the mind changes. What is that remains constant beneath all that change? So those are called that the second path is more of a contemplative, where you reflect more about ultimate reality. And in that reflection, self reflection, you get into the understanding of the self. So it's like a second layer.
Mm-hmm.
A third layer is non intellectual, it's more of sensing the energy. So you become more aware of how are you vibrating when you're too much in the mind and emotion, and you just know how to start regulating yourself more into the self. But there's still a doing. The last layer is called the doing non doing, where it's a just slight shifting of your willpower and where are you putting it. So you see, it's all speaking about levels of practice.
Yeah. Would you say the way in which you presented them is going from the like coarser levels of reality of experience to the finer levels, and then
Totally.
going and then seeing in that they are ultimately all of the same taste or of the same quality in,
Yeah.
like, if you look at them closely, I find there is nothing else but consciousness beneath them,
Yeah.
or
The,
your own true self.
like the material world that is very solid is all mind, is all consciousness.
Yeah.
Yet to understand that in a non-intellectual level is the game. It's not only to say, "Oh yes, it's all consciousness," right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's to really experience how that is true. And
Yeah.
so that's why uh, basically is the movement of our consciousness. Consciousness is kind of trapped in its idea of itself as an individual in a world of form, moving from that place to a place where consciousness realizes its infinity and completeness. And
Yeah.
then actually living in the whole reality, because it's not about negating the world of forms, it's about having a deeper understanding of diversity as a unity. But the
Mm-hmm.
unity doesn't negate the diversity, nor the diversity negates the unity. Both are
Yeah.
true aspects of the same reality.
Yeah. I also find in the end it's always about unifying even the spiritual teachings that sometimes make these statements about there is this world and then there is consciousness. But through deeper investigation, you always come to the realization that there never was anything of apart from the get-go. So you look at your experience very closely in meditation, and it just dissolves no matter from which angle you look at it, whether that's your thoughts, your emotions, your physical sensations, and even something you see. I find it all dissolves into the same being.
Yeah.
Um, because that's really something that shifted for me earlier this year, in, like, you could say, one awakening, where since then I really, when I take objects, I cannot see anything as less alive anymore.
Mhm.
it's it's all, it has come alive. So
Yeah.
there is, before it was like almost like your mind overlooked physical reality, because it's like in its mind it downgraded it as just dead matter,
Yeah.
But once you realize that it's all mind and it's all your own being, then it's difficult to see any real, like, on the fundamental level, any difference between the matter and the living matter. So it's all the same taste for me now.
Yeah, I love how you use that word, the same taste, because there's words in different traditions to that word, same taste. Like I think Buddhism, Zen Buddhism, uses that exactly term, same
Yeah.
taste. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
in the in yoga, it's called samarasa, same taste.
Mm-hmm.
Rasa,
Okay.
rasa is flavor, and sama
Mm-hmm.
is equal. So equal
Mm-hmm.
flavor, meaning I can feel the world and all its diversity, but I also have this underlying feeling of it's all me. Is
Yeah.
And that's a growing feeling that happens through years. In my case, it's been a growing feeling that has been happening through years of practice where all this dichotomy of high and low, good and bad, pure and unpure, uh, sacred and non-sacred starts collapsing into
Mm-hmm.
understanding that it's all sacred or it's all beautiful and it's all.
Yeah.
That's why I love the stories of the say the illuminated masters in India. And one of them I remember is what's called Sipruana, and he would sit on a heap of garbage, and that's where he would spend his time. And they would find him
Mm.
always on heaps of garbage. But when people would go to that heap that he would live, at the end it was smelling as roses, you know. And India is filled with this magic, and
Mm.
I believe in it. I believe in the power of mind over matter. And
Yeah. That really is something I would see as resembled in my experience as well. Like when this coming alive, like also gradually grew after this experience. There, I had the direct insight that it's the case, but it somehow closed back down a little bit.
Mhm.
But since then, it has been like ever more present for me, and really, I could taste it more. But also, what you just described, even dirt is of the same beautiful essence as everything else. So there is no, in the most fundamental terms, there is no qualitative difference in a piece of dirt somewhere outside and beautiful roses.
Mhm.
I mean, from the point of view of pure empty consciousness, it's all just an expression of its own beauty.
Exactly.
And that comes more and more comes through in my experience.
And that's the beauty of there's this book written by this woman that I cannot remember, but I love the title because the title says it all. And it's basically
Mm.
love what is.
Mm-hmm.
Love reality as it is,
Yeah.
which means love sickness, love horror, love all of it, because it all is a divine drama of God. And
Mm.
the only purpose of it is its blissful self expression.
Mm.
That's another beautiful teaching of Tantra. One of them is Ashwada, which means savoring. Savor every experience because it has a unique flavor and there's bliss in that. Every moment,
Mm.
like this moment right now between you and I, there's a unique energy.
Mm.
There's a unique subtlety to it. There's a unique moment that will never happen again. Can you savor it? Can you be intimate with it? Can you
Yeah.
appreciate it so fully with your body, with your mind, with all your senses? This connectedness.
Mm.
So Tantra is about that every moment. It's about, can you be more vulnerable with life, where you let life create you, sustain you, and destroy you. And you feel the
Mm-hmm.
bliss of that um, surrender, of that way of
Mm.
surrendering yourself to existence. Because most of the time, if we're not surrendering, we're kind of trying to save ourselves from life, protect ourselves, have an agenda to get what we think we need to be happy and fulfilled. You know, there's a
Mm.
moment where you get tired of that, right? Where you don't believe in that anymore. And then it's
Yeah.
the moment where you start surrendering to the flow of life and to the and how it flows within you and how it flows as a totality where you are that flow, right? Um,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's so beautiful. I was just absorbed into what you said and like looking just at my experience, how it's so fascinating. I find once you get these, like maybe only first glimpses, but it's this recognition that all you have learned and what you hear about this isn't something you just hear intellectually as in the beginning, but you just have to see and really look at your experience, and it's coming alive moment to moment. And there was like a beautiful moment in my journey where before it was so mental, it was so intellectual, and I tried to grasp it and try to understand it. And at some point I just realized I just have to look, I just have to see how this, what is being said, is just true right now. And somehow that was also a big shift for me.
yeah, when you say that, it makes me think when I listen to somebody, like if I choose somebody as a teacher, uh, for me, most important is what I feel when I listen to them. You know, it's
Hmm.
you can listen truth. It has a reverberation. It has a
Yeah.
quality, and like that's why you know teachers that I listen nowadays. One is Adyashanti,
Hmm.
and I love from the place he speaks, and I feel one with him, of course. Another one is Gangaji. You feel that place of repose, of deep repose in herself. That's the beauty when you listen to teachers. You feel how they are so grounded in who they in being. They're so established in that place of fullness and detachment at the same time, and deep connection. And, you know
Mm.
that that self.
Yeah, and that is also true for, I mean, you are making content on Instagram, I'm making content on YouTube, and every time I want to speak about something, I try to, or I get into that space where I'm talking, or I'm not talking anymore, that the words are coming from the experience.
Yeah,
It's a, it's a very intimate connection to what is, and the words just follow.
hmm
And so, in a sense, whenever I'm talking about these topics, I'm no longer talking. It's just a vessel for translation of what is experienced. And so, maybe that's something the greatest teachers um, can do to a degree that everybody who listens can tap into themselves
yeah.
in that same way, and they translate more of that than really the intellectual understanding that has been given.
I mean, both, of course, both have a value, or both are different aspects of the same teaching, like the
Mm.
intellectual aspect and the feeling aspect and the energy aspect. Uh, Interesting enough, when you're a student and you're caught up in the intellectual, you end up falling into this grapplings of why my teacher said this here and why did he say this there, and why are there all contradictions in the spiritual path. you
Yeah.
know, and I remember those days when I was lost in the intellectual grappling of the teachings. And nowadays, when I'm listening to a teacher, I'm just drinking their energy. And yes, I'm receiving the intellectual and the feeling, but what matters is the moment I'm listening to them, how right away they take me into my center, like,
Mm-hmm.
and they remind me, oh yeah, I see how I get lost again and again in the ripples of the mind,
Yeah.
and I love how you share that. Um, that place where we start speaking like from an inner stream that has its own flow.
Mm-hmm.
It's how interesting how language works, right? Uh,
Yeah.
how language can be kind of come from a very controlled intellectual place where we kind of assemble ideas and offer them to other, or how language can come from silence where each word follows the other one in a natural flow,
Yeah.
describing an intimacy with the reality of the present moment.
Yeah. That's what it feels like. Um, to get into that space or to to connect directly to being, it is experienced like your own speaking is coming from that silence, just in the same way as when you listen to someone else.
Exactly.
It comes from the same place.
Yes. Yeah.
There is no more intellectual manifestation or interference with the production, or however you want to say, with the creation of the words.
Yeah.
It comes from the same silence as anything else you hear.
The way I see it is like layers. Like even this conversation between you and I, at the
Mm.
beginning, I wasn't that grounded. I was to
Yeah.
feel my emotional self. And I started paying attention while I was speaking to. Okay, let me witness it, let me be with it. And then little by little, the layers of emotion came kind of calming down. And now you and I are in a much more kind of like
Mm-hmm.
presence grounded place,
Yeah.
which is how, I don't know in your case, but in my case, I experience it very much in the body. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's like a heaviness. It's like it's almost like we repose in oneself. It's like a steadiness. It's like a groundedness. And I often,
Mm-hmm.
when I teach, I used to in the old days, I've been teaching for many years, I would try to connect by different means, and prepare myself. And nowadays, it's almost like I just trust, I just relax,
Mm-hmm.
and just
Yeah.
holding the intention, little by little, it's like this energy starts appearing and it expresses on its own. And almost like you don't want to mention it because the more you mention it, you feel you
Yeah.
obscure it. The more you try to explain it, the more you feel you obscure it. But the more you
Yeah.
let it happen, the more it kind of
Yeah.
takes over and magic
Yeah.
happens, right?
Yeah, that's maybe the case, because when you try to verbalize it, you are interfering with that expression of this silence that's just creating the flow of life in every moment. And the more you try to intellectually grasp at it, the more you restrict it and contain it. That would be my
Correct,
interpretation.
correct. There's a quality again of non-doership,
Yeah, right.
allowing it to
Yeah,
be whatever it is.
yeah. Yeah, last time we were speaking, you also mentioned that you experienced some difficulties in the past, maybe what was it, last year maybe, because you like explored your consciousness or your experience in new ways, and you were kind of presented with a new challenge. How did you handle that in the light of having all these years of practice?
So you're speaking about our first meeting when we had the
Mm-hmm.
conversation? Yeah,
Yeah.
basically, for years, students have been inviting me to ayahuasca retreats,
Mm-hmm.
and I've had different encounters with medicine herbs. Like there was a time I did weed. The other times I've done one that is called rapé, which is tobacco blown, sacred tobacco blown into your nose.
Mm-hmm.
This last time I did ayahuasca, and the three of them have been very, very powerful. And I don't like to do a lot of herbal medicine because for me it's like, for me, I find them very violent for my system, like
Mm-hmm.
too forceful. While natural meditation practice for me is more gentle.
Mm-hmm.
They have their value, but for me, I find them very forceful.
Yeah.
And so when I feel they're forcing me, I don't flow as good. It's hard for me to flow with something that is so forceful. Try to describe it that way. So this last ayahuasca, what put me into contact was with what in one of your videos you speak about existential loneliness. And basically, I think it is a process. I think so. Here it is, my interpretation of an experience. So,
Mm-hmm.
so to go into the experience, I was in my kitchen. So what happened when I took ayahuasca also was that I feel like after the retreat, I kept on being on the influence of the ayahuasca for a whole month. Like in my case, it didn't stop at the end of the retreat. I kept being in process for a whole month. So what happened was that whatever I would think, I would feel it right away very strongly. And so if I would go into a fear thought, I would feel the fear. Whatever was, everything was magnified. I cannot watch TV, I cannot watch radio because it was just too intense. So in that period of time, there was one night where also what happened was that I was very, very present. My mind was way more quiet. And the more present you are and the more quiet is the mind, the perception of oneness becomes more natural.
Yeah.
And what happens is that as you start experiencing oneness, it's almost like the mind reacts, a part of the mind reacts against oneness. It's like, imagine you have an experience of oneness, but the next moment the mind reacts towards it. And what happened to me is that my mind reacted as it has done other times. And the moment it perceived oneness, it saw it as loneliness. It saw it as there's nobody else, just me, basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's interesting because what's happening is that your consciousness is moving from an identity in the ego, in the me, Tomas, my thinking mind, and is moving towards another completely different perception of reality, where you're no longer Tomas, where you are existence itself.
Mm-hmm.
In meditation, that happens to me very naturally. But when it happens with open eyes, it's like my ego is confronted with this oneness, and it reacts because it perceives it as Tomas, this little thing, alone in existence. So
Yeah.
when that comes up, this huge fear comes up of Tomas feeling lonely, absolutely lonely. But
Mm-hmm.
like, and nobody can save me of that loneliness because Tomas at that moment is understanding that nobody else exists, you know.
Yeah.
So it's like it freaks me out. It's like a deep fear of an inevitable truth that he has to
Mm-hmm.
comes to grip with.
Mm-hmm.
So as I spent many days in that state, and I would kind of, after that one night, I had to go out of my apartment. I was, feeling the incredible fear. I was okay. I got to witness this. I got to be aware of it. And thank God I went out and walked. I also called a friend because it was so intense. I couldn't breathe, like I had a panic
Yeah.
attack.
Mm-hmm.
My friend was there. I kind of focused on my friend. It was kind of a way of my mind going back into duality and feel safe. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so that helped me to come out of the fear. But the next days, again and again, the realization would come again and again, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so I said, I have to make peace with this. I got to accept it. I got to let go.
Mm-hmm.
And there was one day that I was walking. Walking is a great way for me to digest or accept something.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was walking, I was repeating a mantra, uh, and I was feeling the fear. And I was okay. And I kept repeating the mantra and going into the state of oneness. Oh, just to clarify, before this, an understanding had happened in one of my meditations where something, a voice within me or an understanding came. Uh, you cannot understand ultimate reality. You have to drop into it. You gotta drop the thinking mind. You cannot remain you and be in ultimate reality. You gotta let go of you. You gotta let go of the knower. You can't you can't know it. You can't be someone relating to it because then the ego freaks out. It's like fear comes up.
Yeah. It's like the part is trying to contain the whole, which is impossible. So
Exactly.
the part just has to merge with the whole in order to know
Exactly.
what reality is.
Which at the end, the part is just a stupid idea in your head about you. You know, it's just a story in your
Yeah.
head that we're so clinging onto it that
Yeah.
that it feels like we're dying when we're letting go of it. And we have to let go of it 1,000 times. Like, it's like, anyway, I was in that walk and I was repeating the mantra. And it's almost like a moment where I accepted the fear and I accepted the death and I accepted the nothingness and I
Mm.
accepted the being. And then I understood, of course, in being, there's no loneliness because there's no concept, because there's no construct. There's just I am.
Mm.
Is in that crucial transition between mind and non mind where the ego tends to freak out because it's hard for it or to let go of. It's hard for us to let go of how we have grappled with reality, to come to a place where there's such a deep surrendering to nothingness, where there's no grappling, there's just surrender. I don't know how to explain.
Yeah.
And even though I share this process, like it almost seems like I made the transition and I'm there all the time, but I'm not. I go there and I go back, and I go there and I go back, and I keep moving through these two worlds of duality and non-duality. And I
Mm.
think the more I do that transition, the more natural it becomes, and the less fear there is in the process of it. But even now, when I was sharing to you, the fear, not so strong, but a little fear came up. It's like my ego again, like, oh no, you're going to go there again. You know,
Yeah,
interesting.
it's the same for me. I have to tell myself, don't listen too closely or it all comes rushing back. No, but yeah, I very much feel your experience, this whole fear around oneness.
Is
I
it?
also
Would you describe it the same way for you, or would you describe it slightly different? Like, how would you describe that for you?
it felt like what you described almost matched my experience to the point, to the word which you said. So I mean, for me, it didn't last that long. I don't have a full week or several days where I was confronted with that, but it was much more time in between. So um, the times it happened, it developed into the last experience where this happened is I had the same fear coming up. But at one point, it was just a few minutes in. Somehow, this fear, what I realized the fear was part of the oneness. It was just merging somehow into that oneness. I didn't have to defend it somehow. It wasn't mine anymore.
Okay.
Even that last little bit that felt this fear is mine. I am suffering this fear. That somehow went away, and then it was just the only words. I mean, I have goosebumps talking about it. So it's silence among that which is happening. So um, the silence is beyond what you hear, beyond what you see, and it's no longer this fear of being the only thing there is, because that is, from my understanding, something that can only be kind of hijacked by the sense of ego. It tries to make that experience its experience
Yeah.
to still remain alive,
Yeah. Yeah.
because the fear only arises when it hasn't yet realized that it's not itself this oneness, but it doesn't exist and there is this oneness.
Yeah. It's like a
And
confusion in the mind between existing in ego and existing in the self. It's like in that transition, it gets confused.
yeah, yeah.
You know, when you were sharing what you were sharing, came to me another part of the experience that I had walking was, and this was very meaningful for me. It was that a moment I said, oh, I have to accept that I am the truth. I have to let go of my illusion that somebody else has the truth.
Hmm.
It's almost like I had to mourn. There was like a grieving process of a world where I don't know and the guru knows or somebody else knows. And in some reason, I can live in the illusion that there's something that is going to be given to me that is going to make me whole. or it's almost like living in the illusion that the support is out there, that it's this idea that I can hold on to something out there that's going to protect me.
Yeah. And that only works as long as the boundary is still there. But the realization I think you also had is when this boundary dissolves, there's no more need, but also not anymore the possibility to fulfill itself through something else. Because that something else has been seen as just another expression of this oneness.
Exactly.
That's my, yeah.
Yeah, that's the
And
thing.
the other day I talked to a friend and he had a similar experience, and he described it as, in that moment it feels like everyone else has already gone home, but you are somehow still there. Like the world is completely empty. And that is still a description of the transition process,
Yeah,
where
yeah,
somehow you project your insight onto everyone else.
yeah.
You say, okay, I now realize there is emptiness here, there's no one here, so therefore no one else is there, but I'm still somehow there. It's kind of
Can you explain?
confused.
Can you explain again his metaphor? Everyone else has gone home, and what was the next?
Mhm. And it feels like you are still like walking around in an empty world.
Yes, totally. Yes,
Yeah.
that's what the fear that I had that night. I felt like in the world, absolutely alone. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so
Yeah.
good. I love to hear that. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Wow. Fuck, I feel
Yeah,
really
because
heat right now when I hear that because, man, it's
mm,
just this validation of experience is so important. But it was
yes,
just
it
like
is.
that. I felt like there was nobody else in the world. Everybody
Yeah.
had gone out of the world, and I was left alone, lonely in the world. Yes,
Yeah, right.
the feeling.
Yeah. Mm. And I think it's, if you and what you did, you stay with the experience and you just use your ability to focus on what is and concentrate, you will realize that there is still some small vibration that you could call a resistance
Hmm.
that somehow grabs this experience um, as meaning something to it.
Yes.
But if you see that that's still something you can let go of, then this oneness isn't anymore something that's terrifying, in my experience.
In my experience, there's a grieving.
Hmm.
There's a grieving of the world we know. There's the ego is grieving.
Hmm.
There's a moment where
Yeah.
it's like, for lack of a better word, it's like a process of fuck. And actually Adyashanti used that. It was
Yeah.
he Adyashanti says it's like people come to the spiritual path in the same way that what is the animal that before it becomes a butterfly is a what? It's a caterpillar. Okay.
Yeah.
So a caterpillar comes to the spiritual path, and he thinks that the spiritual path is going to be him acquiring beautiful wings, right? And so he's so happy that in the spiritual path he's going to be able to fly and have these beautiful wings. But then there's that moment when he's inside the cocoon where the realization comes, oh, I won't become, I won't get butterflies. I'm going to die. It's by
Yeah.
dying to me that I'll become something else, but I don't know what I'll become.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the freaking moment where yes, where we need to acquire a lot of presence to not get
Mm.
caught up in the reaction of the ego. That
Yeah.
because it reacts differently at different times. It comes with different strategies as you approach that moment.
Mm.
Uh, and at the end, interesting enough, the only thing we're letting go is of a belief.
Yeah.
The only thing we're letting go is of a thought construct. But
Yeah.
it's such a fundamental assumption that we have on reality that to let it go, it feels so pivotal to our own existence. But yes, because
Yeah.
what exists is not anymore the ego. And and then I've heard how teachers move in this kind of range of identity. They do have an ego, but
Mm.
they also are grounded fully in the self. So and
Mm.
they move fluently into this existence of reality, where yes,
Yeah.
we are the earth, the black earth, and at the same time I'm the tree, a specific tree, and the tree knows it's earth and the tree at the same time. So somehow
Mm.
it's something that it's almost like our awareness have to expand to have yes, a wider perspective of our reality. That's what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
We're just going back to a wider perspective that yes, I haven't stopped being Tomas. Yet also I realize that Tomas is just a ripple in the ocean that we are. You know?
Mm. Yeah, and I also find it beautiful how Rupert Spira puts it.
Who?
He says, Rupert Spira,
Can you go slower in the name? How you spell it?
Rupert Spira.
Is it like a German writer?
I think he's from England. He's a teacher from England.
Oh, I haven't heard about it.
Um, yeah, I can send you something of
Good.
from him. He puts it like when your true nature is recognized, the ego will still remain for some time. It will slowly match its own activity to the light of truth. Because when everything is experienced from that true beingness, that parts of yourself that do not align with that energy, with that existent inherent love, those parts will naturally over time fall away.
Mm-hmm.
And that matches my experience so beautifully, because when you are in this, in your own true self, everything that you do and that is somehow colliding with that inner happiness from the true self,
Mm-hmm.
that is immediately seen as some false belief still in the ego.
Yeah.
And so it purifies the ego. And I think these masters naturally over time that have been in this state for a long time, they purify the ego. And what remains is like a very good representation of this true self filtered through the human form.
I love it.
That's what,
I love it. Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, you can feel the suffering inherent in that thought construct, part of your ego.
Mm-hmm.
So yes,
Yeah.
there's like a purification of the ego where
Mm-hmm.
first the ego doesn't understand itself anymore as something separate,
Mm-hmm.
but also where that which arises in the mind, uh, it's purified in that, I would say, in that vibration of the self, uh,
Mm-hmm.
where where only what is coherent with that vibration remains.
Yeah.
And yet surrendering to that fire is a process, isn't it? Because it's a willing process that has to happen constantly.
Yeah.
Because or
Yeah.
we can constantly save ourselves from that fire and remain from our ignorant way free to do whatever we want,
Mm-hmm.
to keep, you know, pursuing our desires, uh, egotistical desires that we're so attached to.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, because
And in a sense, I find that whenever a belief that is not aligned with that truth, when that collides with the truth, it's exactly the expression of fear for the most part. It's that fear when that comes up when these vibrations that are not in harmony, when they collide, then the experience that we have of that, I think, is fear.
Can you be more?
Because every time you
Can you be
yeah.
more specific? Like, can you give an example?
Yeah, so every time you experience a fear, if you inquire into that, what is really the fear, what you could say is the substance of the fear, you will see that, or in my experience, I saw that the fear dissolves with the underlying belief that it comes with.
Yeah,
So there is not only the fear is always connected to a story
yeah,
that we create in our mind.
yeah,
And so it, in order to dissolve the fear, you need to look at the story.
yeah,
And yeah,
yeah. And
that's what.
basically, the fear at the end, I always call it resistance.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So we went from like the entrance point of your journey to like the deepest insights, which I think was a beautiful arc to this conversation.
There's
To
some,
tie this all back to,
there's something that I wanted to tie back before we end. It's about
yeah.
Kundalini.
Mm-hmm.
And you asked me about it, and did I felt it was a distraction or a, no, I would never call it a distraction.
Mm-hmm.
Kundalini is the spontaneous wisdom of my body. And at each moment it, it did the right thing and has done the right thing for my own. Basically, Kundalini is the active manifestation of the self in the body. It's the active wisdom of self energy in the body. And
Mm-hmm.
so, what I think that my master did is she woke up that since the guru or the teacher is vibrating in the self, it's almost like they give you an infusion of self energy. They can pass the self energy. That happens when you listen to an enlightened master. You get an infusion of self energy. But they can also
Yeah.
do that at willpower. They can infuse you with self energy. And so that
Mm-hmm.
it's almost like that wakes up that dormant power within the body that knows itself as the self.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like
Yeah.
the body is never disconnected from the self. The body is one always with the self. But it has to experience the disconnection of the mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost like the wisdom of the body takes over, and that's what's called Kundalini.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, meditation has always been surrendering to that power
Mm-hmm.
within the body. And at the beginning of the path, it was very dramatical. Like
Okay.
I would
Yeah.
get, my body would move in waves and I would get sounds. And it was very dramatic because I was very dramatic. And it was a way to grab me, like, "Huh." But as the more I've been able to become aware of my subtle self, the more the movements of the energy is just way more subtle. It doesn't need to be that dramatic. But it's
Mm-hmm.
just following this inner subtle guidance. And whenever I meditate, I just feel I'm just getting in touch with this power that I am. And,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what's Kundalini. So there's also at the beginning when you're starting and you get a Kundalini awakening, you experience it as something different from yourself. But as you go
Mm-hmm.
walk in the path of meditation, there's a natural, as the ego dissolves, again, there's another alignment with that energy where you recognize you're one with it. It's your own primal
Mm-hmm.
self.
Okay, that makes sense for me because in my experience, when I think back, I have always been kind of a very calm person, so I never experienced a lot of anger or hatred, or so I never saw something of value for me in that, you could say, because whenever I went into meditation, maybe I was already aware of some subtler positive energy of, you could say, maybe this inner being. So I was always, from the get-go, from the beginning of my meditation practice, somehow attracted to those more subtle mantras or objects of concentration. So, but yeah, I'm of course curious about Kundalini and the related practices. But yeah, what you experience makes sense. That maybe, or would you agree that that is not only not necessary, but it isn't also for every person, every type of person?
I don't know.
Okay.
It's a mystery. I think, you know, well, I'm very grateful because when my guru initiated me, I, at that moment, this energy grabbed me and I went
Mm-hmm.
deep to the self. Like it took me right to the self. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I was 16 years old and I had the realization of the self, being one with
Mm-hmm.
it. And
Yeah.
so it gave me an total certainty of who I was and what was the path about. Even when I got out of the state of the self and I was going back into the awareness of the body, I could feel and see the layers of mind that I had been
Mm-hmm.
identified that were keeping me stuck in a limited self identity. So it became
Mm-hmm.
very clear to me what my spiritual practice was about. And it was becoming free of my self identifications. And I don't know well, I mean, it's hard to know what each person needs or what's the path for anybody. But
Yeah.
what I believe is that, as always, we all have our unique path to self knowledge.
Yeah.
And, you know,
Yeah.
it doesn't mean that in your path, Kundalini is not happening. It is happening at another level because it's your own body energy.
Mm.
I can feel
Okay,
you.
that probably comes down to my understanding of it.
When I feel you, I can sense your energy. And yes, it's very different from mine. And
Mm-hmm.
I can see totally how your path is different because
Yeah.
of what you need, which was different from what I need. You know.
Yeah. Yeah, we all end up in the same place, but we start somewhere else. So it's an individual journey for everyone to the same ultimate oneness. But
And yet no, because think about this. Uh, we all end up in the same realization, but how that realization transforms your form is unique, and how that realization
that's, yeah, okay. Yeah, I see.
transform me is unique. So that's why spiritual teachers are so varied and different in their ways, and they might all have
Mm-hmm.
come to the same realization, but the way that manifests in them is completely different. Some might be
Yeah.
very peaceful, and some might be very passionate and even aggressive. Because
Yeah.
for energy, that's the beauty of God, that God can take all the forms,
Yeah.
and yet
Yeah,
and
it's so
still be
true.
healing. Like that's something very interesting that I see different gurus so different from one another in the way they teach or the way they act. Some can be very
Mm-hmm.
aggressive. Some can be
Yeah.
very motherly. Uh,
Yeah.
and yet they work for their disciples, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, that's also what I found. It's not the knowledge itself, it's finding also um, the right translation for oneself, you could say, because every person is making their own translation of the truth that they are perceiving. So you have to match with the energy of the person, of the teacher, and not every teacher is right for every student,
Oh,
probably.
I get what you're saying. Yes, yes, exactly. Yeah, that's why we resonate with certain teachers and not with others, because
Yeah.
they're speaking to where we are at a certain moment and what we need. And that's
That as well. Yeah.
yeah, totally. Yeah.
Yeah. To like tie this back in with the beginning, if someone listens to this and maybe he has not meditated in his life so far and he got like really curious about what is that true self of mine, like how can I start getting closer to it, what is your usual recommendation for someone who's like pretty much a beginner to meditation? Is there something in general or?
It all depends who he is, right? Where we're speaking of
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
It all depends who he is. Uh, so, I mean, at the end, each one of us, I mean, if that person came to this conversation and if this conversation spoke to them and they resonated with them, so they should go to either you or me.
Okay, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
You know, because at the end, it means that the way we are teaching, meaning sharing our experiences, because for me, that's what teaching is. Uh,
Yeah.
it's speaking to them. And, you know, it's like follow the path. Each one of us follow a path, right? Like I had a journey, and that led me to Eric Fromm, and then that led me to Herman Hesse, and that led me to one thing leads you to the other. Uh,
Hmm.
that's what I'm saying. Follow the path, like find out what about us speaks to you, and what about how we spoke about meditation speaks to you, and
Hmm.
keep going into that path and see what you find. You know.
Yeah. Sometimes I like to think of it this way. When someone comes from the self, the small self, um, we all are in this mode of operating from desire. So we want something for the small self.
Yeah.
So in general, I find the meditation that works best in the beginning is something that the small self, the ego, likes. So it should be, just as a general guideline, be probably enjoyable and something you can keep up at first. So starting with shorter duration, probably making it a regular habit, and just going into the meditation with the attitude of, I'm just going to enjoy myself here for this period of time, no matter which technique you use. But um, I find that this loving attitude towards the practice is essential, um, to not quit early on. Would you say this is like a framework
Totally.
someone can work
I
with in
love
the
that.
beginning?
I love that. Yeah, and I teach that. Um, yeah, like find the pleasure in what you're doing, even though often meditation will also be grappling with pain and learning to, because you know what happens today is that I can take pain, and if I surrender, I can feel the bliss and pain. But at the beginning, it's
Yeah,
pain, and so
yeah,
and often the spiritual path is about embracing pain because it's what we're avoiding. Um,
yeah.
so yes, what you're saying is truth. What I would say to anybody is that whatever, if you really want to get into the spiritual path, as my teacher would say, you need a teacher. You need a
Hmm.
you need somebody that it will. Sorry, you don't need, but it will help you a lot. to expose yourself to somebody that speaks to you and that you can question and that you can
Mm-hmm.
study and exchange. And because when we try to grapple into the spiritual truth with the mind, it's so easy to get deluded and to spend
Mm-hmm.
years deluded.
Yeah.
So, as my teacher would say, try to find a teacher that for you holds the truth, that really speaks to you, and commit to that person for a while. So,
Mm.
grapple with it,
Yeah.
question, uh, compare it to your own experience, uh, study. And then there will be a moment maybe where that teacher doesn't speak to you anymore, and somebody else will speak to you from where you're at. Then go there
Yeah.
and continue your journey. You know, that's been kind of my
Mm.
journey that way.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. That's great advice, I think, for the beginning or for the whole path. I mean, keeping that in mind probably helps at every step
Yeah.
in it.
Even though at this moment I wouldn't say I'm following one person. At this moment, I feel like I'm it's also another metaphor could say is follow life. But to follow
Mm-hmm.
life, you got to be a good student. Every moment, every interaction is a teacher.
Yeah.
Right here, being with you, I've learned, I've
Yeah.
remembered, I've reconnected with something. So,
Mm-hmm.
for the true disciple, every moment of life is the teacher, right?
Yeah. I find it takes a certain clarity in order to be able to like use life as a teacher
Total.
because you um so yeah, that resembles both of our journeys. Like in the beginning you study as much as you can, you meditate as much as you can, and then someone at some point you get a grasp for this self, and then this becomes your north star, so to speak, because you finally find it and you can see it, and then it's guiding you, and you don't need so much input anymore from teachers or books or so. Yeah, that's what I find is very much resembling my own experience as well. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very important point what you just said. Once you know what you're looking for, you everything is the teacher.
Yeah,
But
that's
that's
right.
important. Until you haven't had that, you can get very easily lost into where are you going? You know,
Hmm.
what is the aim
Yeah.
of meditation? What is the aim of taking drugs? Medicinal herbs, or what's the aim of all of it? Um, Interesting enough, different people find different meaning to life, and often it's not necessarily the self.
Hmm.
Like each person is in their own path. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah, it's all part of the infinite ways God expresses itself.
yeah,
Even even if never a recognition of its own being and self is happening, it's all still a realization of the infinite potential.
yeah. The beauty of God is
So,
His absolute freedom, isn't it? His absolute freedom allows,
unconditional love.
yeah, allows him to explore the infinite possibilities of his own self-discovery or its own
Yeah.
self-expression. And so,
Yes.
for some of us, this goal of self-recognition is our purpose or is our star, but from others, it's
Mhm.
not. You know,
No. Yeah.
and
Yeah, I find there's a very clear point in someone's life when they recognize that maybe this is maybe not at that time, but later they will recognize that there was a time in their life when it was clear that this path to self realization was started. So, this stream entry. is something that's real. So you can spend lifetimes before ever entering spiritual paths or spiritual teachings, and that's perfectly fine.
Or you enter into the spiritual path looking for powers. You enter into the spiritual path looking to go to planets and travel and be with the extraterrestrials. And
Yeah, it's all an expression of infinite love.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's
it's beautiful.
it makes me
Yeah,
proud of the teachers that I had though.
yeah, yeah. I find we had a great conversation. Um, do you want to leave the listeners with anything of yours? Where can they find you? Where are you maybe present on a website, or you can
Yeah,
tell them now?
yeah, simple Instagram, TR meditation,
Mm-hmm.
T, letter R, meditation. And then
Okay, yeah, I will link to that in the description.
yeah, and from Instagram you can find my website and anything
Mm-hmm.
else through that. I do basically
Okay.
what I do is a meditation course. That's like my main thing. Although I also kind of teach yoga, and I also do life coaching, but it's all
Mm-hmm.
connected to my main teaching, which is self awareness. The more
Okay.
if I teach yoga, it's with that aim. If I do coaching, it's liberating from that place. You know,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, self awareness.
Okay. Yeah, great. I will put the links in the description,
Thank
and
you.
people can find you there.
Thank you,
Great.
Laurie.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you for all your input. I really enjoyed it. Yeah, and I hope we can connect again in the future
Yes,
and
great pleasure.
do that.
Great pleasure
Okay.
to this dance.